The death of Renee Good in Minneapolis started as a deeply personal tragedy, but it quickly, and I mean quickly, blew up into a national controversy. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the person, the incident, and the political firestorm that just erupted right after, piecing the whole story together.
But before this whole thing became a story about protests and politics, it was the story of a person. And there's really no better place to start than with her own words. This line is from one of Renee Good's poems, and it just gives you a little glimpse into the voice that was so tragically silenced.
So who was Renee Good? Well, according to the people who loved her and from her own writing, these were the roles that really defined her. She was 37 years old, a mother of 3, a wife, and a poet who had just recently moved with her family to Minneapolis.
To really get a sense of the person at the heart of all this, let's turn to the words of the people who knew her best.
In a statement they gave to the media, her family just painted this portrait of a beautiful light. They talked about her as someone with this bottomless capacity for love and an optimism that was so relentless, they said, it was actually contagious.
And maybe the most heartbreaking detail from her family statement was this right here. They remembered her as their editor, the person who always gave them that gentle guidance with their words. It's a line that just so powerfully illustrates the massive void she left, not just as someone they loved, but as their guide.
Okay, so now we have to turn to the incident itself, the sequence of events that unfolded on a Wednesday morning in South Minneapolis.
So in the immediate aftermath, a few key facts started to surface. Renee Good was shot by an ICE agent named Jonathan Ross. And here's a critical detail. It was confirmed he was not wearing a body camera. That means there's no direct police footage of what happened. And while Homeland Security did release some video from the scene, it cuts off right before the shooting, which created this huge information vacuum that would basically fuel the firestorm that was coming.
This shooting sent immediate shockwaves through Minneapolis, a city that is unfortunately all too familiar with high-profile deaths involving law enforcement. The community's reaction was swift, it was emotional, and it was incredibly powerful.
The community's response was just immediate, and it took a lot of different forms. You had these quiet, somber vigils that were held for 4 straight nights. Native groups organized prayers, voicing this specific fear that ICE agents, quote, can't tell us apart. And then, of course, it took the form of large-scale protests demanding ICE out of Minnesota, which at times led to confrontations and arrests.
But that citywide grief was also so deeply personal. This quote is from Trevor Hatekomp, a resident who lived near the scene. His words just capture the direct, human trauma that was felt by a neighborhood that suddenly found itself at the center of a global story.
And this just shows you how far the ripple effects spread. The fear wasn't just contained to the neighborhood where the shooting happened. After reports of ICE activity near schools, Minneapolis public schools actually started offering remote learning options. I mean, think about that. A decision that changed the daily lives of families all across the entire city.
That community crisis very quickly became this tense political standoff, pitting local and state officials directly against the federal government.
And to give you a sense of the scale of the federal presence we're talking about, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar claimed that the number of ICE officers in the state was actually greater than the combined police forces of Minneapolis and St. Paul. She called it completely out of balance.
The investigation itself quickly became the central conflict, and you can see on this chart, local and state authorities were just repeatedly clashing with federal agencies. Minnesota officials wanted a joint investigation, but the FBI insisted on leading it alone. Federal authorities refused to share key evidence, and that prompted the local county attorney's office to launch its own public portal, basically pleading for witnesses to bypass the federal process and share what they knew directly with them.
Here's Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty, and she really laid out the core of the local argument. She stressed that her community expected transparency, and that a local investigation, or at the very least, local access to the federal one, was absolutely essential for that to ever happen.
Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey was even more direct. He said flat out that ICE hadn't changed its operations in the city since the shooting, and he expressed his wish that they would just pause their activities, or, as he put it, even better, leave.
So as this whole jurisdictional battle was raging in Minnesota, the story of Renee Good's death started to resonate far beyond the state line. It was capturing national attention and sparking a much wider conversation.
Yeah, the events in Minneapolis clearly did not happen in a vacuum. Solidarity protests quickly started popping up in cities from coast to coast. We're talking New York, Chicago, San Francisco, which just goes to show how deeply the issues raised by Good's death were resonating all across the country.
And the story also jumped right into the national political arena. Here you have New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham weighing in. She criticized the federal administration's early characterization of Renee Good and called for a transparent investigation that actually respects due process.
And this shift in conversation, it went beyond just the facts and the politics. Community leaders started asking these much larger, more philosophical questions. A Minneapolis pastor, Angela Denker, for example, questioned the fundamental moral logic behind everything, writing about what she felt was a cheap, brutish, ugly view of the world that was being sold to Americans.
Ultimately, the story of Renee Good leaves us with this incredibly complex question. When local calls for transparency clash with federal control over an investigation, what does the path to accountability even look like? It's a question that Minneapolis, and really the entire nation, was left to confront.